Steve tonight is going to be talking about Buddy. We had a little conversation at his general meetup last month where we were talking about some of the continuous integration stuff, some of the sort of more developer-y workflows that his company has been using, and it sort of piqued my ear a little bit. We've been having similar conversations about that internally, so we talked about having him on here. I think it's going to be great to at least have a discussion about this. If you do have questions, yeah, if you do have questions,
great-ish. It's great-ish.
Yeah, we'll be monitoring the chat. Just go ahead and throw your questions in there. We'll try to bubble them up for Steve so that he doesn't have to keep looking at it. But Steve, you want to introduce what you do?
Yeah, I think I know most everybody here, but I'm Steve Zehngut. I'm the founder of Zeek Interactive. And like Brandon said, tonight we're going to talk about Buddy, which is Buddy.works. If you're looking for it on in a Google search. So Buddy.works is the URL. I'm going to share my screen here in a minute, but just to let you know kind of how we integrate this into our system. We pretty much rely on Buddy for all of our projects. It's how we deploy code. And so Buddy is a tool chaining system. We're going to look at that in a minute, but we've kind of standardized our process as to how we deploy code from Git over to a server. And that tool chaining system also allows us not just to deploy the code, but to also run automations at the same time. For example, make pretty heavy use of Ghost Inspector. So Ghost Inspector is a visual regression tool. And so what we'll do is when we set up a new project or we're working on a site, we'll set up Ghost Inspector to do the visual testing. And that can be a step in Buddy. So when it deploys code, Ghost Inspector will go through, a dozen or so pages on the site just to see if anything has changed. And then it'll alert us, if something is wrong with the site, right? So then we can go and kind of analyze and see if there's something actually wrong or if we need to roll back the code. And so that's kind of a handy thing to use inside of the tool chaining. So I'm going to stop my video and share my screen here because Zoom has not been cooperating with me lately. So let's hope this screen share lasts. But this is my front screen here in Buddy. Everybody can see that? That's kind of the obligatory question now on Zoom. So, all right. With Buddy, we've got all of our projects here. So I've got about 50 projects set up in Buddy, but I'm just going to go through sort of the process of how we do this. And like I said, or like Brandon said, we're using Buddy as our continuous integration system, meaning as we're writing code, it goes through Buddy, goes through the tool chaining process, whatever we've set up, and then gets deployed to the server. Now, Buddy will allow you to auto deploy the code. So as soon as I add something to Git, it'll go to a server, or you can manually deploy the code, right? So it'll wait until you actually go and push a button to deploy it. And we actually use both on most of our projects. What we'll do is we will manually deploy the code for production, right? So our live server, we're actually not going to push anything until we know it's ready to go. But on a staging or a dev server, we'll just set it up to do auto deploys, right? Especially a dev server, because as we're writing the code, we want it to just automatically show up on the server. And so Buddy, like I said, Buddy allows you to do either. And part of the reason I'm explaining that is because each of these projects can have multiple pipelines. So that's kind of the first thing to know about Buddy is setting up a project is really the easy part. So I'm just going to kind of whiz through this. So when you're setting up a new project, you basically say, okay, this is my GitHub account. You log in as you, and then it'll give you all the repositories to choose from that are within your GitHub account. I'm not going to go through that process here. I've already set one up for the purposes of this meetup. And so I've got an account ready to go. And because I chose my GitHub repo, and I set it up. It's basically, it's all ready to go. And so we're going to go, I've got most of this pipeline in the can here, but I'm going to go ahead and recreate this in a moment. And so that's what I was saying here is, so the project's the easy part, but within the project, I can have multiple pipelines, right? And so typically within every project, we'll have a production pipeline, a staging pipeline, and a development pipeline, right? And each of those really is leading out to a different server, right? If you say you're working with WP Engine, right? WP Engine automatically gives you those 3 instances, within their architecture. So you get production, staging, and dev, and most modern hosts will do that, right? So we'll have a pipeline for each of those, and again, depending on the client, that's how we review code or push code through the system. And so what I'm looking at here is,
hey Steve,
yep.
In that sort of vein of thought, is it possible to push to multiple servers across different servers or different hosts, different platforms? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, let me show you an example of what that looks like. So one of my clients is called One River School. They have 14 or 15 different locations, and each of those locations is its own WordPress instance, right?
Okay.
And so I've actually got, these are all of their production pipelines except for development. All of these ones called production are their different locations, right? And so when we go to roll out code, right, what we'll do is first push it to development for review, but once it's ready to go, there's a button over here that says execute all pipelines in the project, and it'll just go through and roll out to all those servers in a row. Now, Buddy can only queue about 2 or 3 at a time. And so when you push this button, you'll actually see it. You'll see all of these sort of go into the queue, and then it'll roll them out in progression.
Okay.
But yes, cool. You're not limited to one server. And you can go out to multiple servers and multiple hosts, and we'll see how to do that in just a minute. But yeah, we use this exactly in that way. Okay,
Jim, does that answer your question? You can keep, I think we can go forward, but I think that addresses.
So I've already got, again, for the purposes of this meetup, I set up a production pipeline, but I'm going to go through the process again, just so you can kind of see what this is and what's here. And so once you have a project set up in Buddy, you click add a new pipeline. You give it a name, we'll just call this one staging, as if we're setting up the staging pipeline. And like I said, remember before I said, you can either have this manual or on push, right? And so on push means as soon as you commit code to Git, it's going to trigger this to push out to this, basically to start this pipeline. That's what that on push means. And so these are the triggers it's asking for when you're committing code, right? And this is what's great about this is you choose your trigger, and then you choose what branch you want to push, right? And so most of our projects are set up with a master branch for production, a staging branch for staging, and a development branch for dev. And so you can actually choose, I want to listen for this branch. And so if I've pushed something to develop, then you can say on push, go out to the development server. And basically what it's doing is it's listening for that branch. So that's what this first step is. Right now, again, I just set up a very basic GitHub repo before I hopped on here. So I only have a master branch, and we're going to set it up to do on push. Make sense so far? Cool. So the second thing, so now that we've told it when we want to push, now you start to set up your tools in the chain. And this is the coolest part of Buddy, right? So essentially what these are actions. And we'll look at the chain in a minute, but what it's asking me for here is what action do you want to execute, and when do you want to execute that action? And so I'm just going to set up one action here, and then we'll go back and kind of review the order of these actions. But the way we push code is we do everything through Rsync, right? We find that that's the fastest and most efficient way to push code. It also is not necessarily a destructive process. It'll kind of look for the necessary changes and then push out. But if you're used to using FTP or SFTP, you can use those as well, right? And so as far as your transfer process goes, how you're going to get code from Buddy to your server, that's up to you. We just prefer Rsync. Okay. Now that I've set up Rsync, I'm just going to grab the credentials here for the server I set up. And I set up again, right before this, I set up just an instance on Nexus. And so Buddy will, like you saw there, will support pretty much any transfer protocol, as FTP, SFTP, or Rsync. Again, we prefer Rsync, and so we're typically working with Nexus or Liquid Web, which is the same host, or WP Engine. They all support Rsync right out of the box. But again, if your host doesn't, then you can just fall back to SFTP. That's fine. And so I set up my my instance here in Nexus. I've grabbed my credentials already. So let me go ahead and put this in. And so I've put in the password, but I'm going to stop there for a second. You're not locked into just a login and password. If you want something that's a little bit more secure, you can actually have Buddy set up its own SSH key. And this is, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to use a password. But if you want, you can choose ID RSA. And then Buddy will actually give you the command to go over to your remote host that you're pushing to execute, to set up the other side of that key on your host, right? And so that's what this is showing here in this black area, is basically just to set up in the authorized keys what it's expecting on your host, so that Buddy can write out to the server. And so, like I said, you're not necessarily locked in the password. You can use something that's more secure. My remote path is this. So this is where I want my repo to go. With our repos, we've set up everything so that we're only committing the WP content folder to the repo. We don't commit any core code. And so that's why I'm specifically directing this to go to WP content. But your repo might be set up differently. On most hosts, Nexus, or excuse me, most managed WordPress hosts, Nexus, WP Engine, they're controlling the core code. So everything in our repo is just what's in WP content. And that's why I'm controlling the path here. And then I don't know exactly what all these things mean. I just know where to set them. And so let's go ahead and put this here. And so I do know that I want the process to be recursive, right? We want it to look into directories. And my custom options here is basically the flag that I'm adding to the end of rsync, which is the L flag. And again, I don't remember exactly what that does. I'm just used to setting up these pipelines. So that's what I do there. Maybe Brandon can tell us what this does.
Nope.
Nope. I knew. I was just putting you on the spot for fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The last thing you want to do is set up your ignore paths. And again, I've just got a template file that I work off of, but this is basically just saying when you rsync, don't overwrite any of this stuff. Ignore this stuff, right? Because this is the stuff that we want to leave on the server. We don't want to overwrite. And again, we just built up a very large file of ignore paths over the years. And most of these, some of these come from WP Engine, some of these come from Liquid Web, Nexus, some come from Kinsta, right? It just depends on what host we're using. We just throw them all in there, and we've just got a file on our computers that we just copy. But you'll develop your own as to what files you want to ignore. Typically, you're going to ignore like your Git folder. You're going to ignore your your MU plugins folder, so that kind of thing. So if you're used to doing deployments for WordPress, these are pretty standard as to what you're going to ignore on the server. And that's it as far as setting up that particular action. Just look at yep. And so I'm going to add this action. Oh. Let's get rid of. All right, so in my chain now, I've got a single action. So when I deploy code, it's then going to run this rsync process and move the code from Buddy to the server. Now, there's one step to kind of understand, and this will help you kind of wrap your head around how Buddy works, is this file system tab. It's really nothing you're ever going to need to do anything with, but it's a visualization into what Buddy's doing, right? And so essentially with the way Buddy works, at least the way I understand it, is when you commit code, right? And when you do either a manual trigger or an on push trigger inside of Buddy, it's actually making a copy of your code over to its own internal file system. And it's using that to operate actions on. And so again, you're not necessarily going to touch anything in the file system, but as we deploy code, we'll start to see the file system change. So it gives you a little visual tool to see if something changed, if the right thing changed, and what's going on in your file system. And so you can see now that I have this set up and ready to go, I've got the last 4 commits ready to send out to the server, right? And so because I just set this up, I think there's probably 4 commits total in my Git repo. Yep, 4 commits. And so that's what this number means. Basically, this says that it's got 4 commits ready to go to the file server. So let's go ahead and run this. Run the pipeline, and you'll actually see it. So it gives you some visual feedback as to what's going on. It's done. That's how fast it went. So it has just deployed the code out to the server. And that's, again, it's a reason I use Rsync, because it truly is that fast. Now, I cheated a little bit because I had already deployed this through the other pipeline. So there were no changes, no true file changes to be done. But even when it's a brand new commit, it's pretty fast when you're using Rsync versus FTP. So that's another reason we like to do that. But let's go ahead and open this up. And so you can see, not only does it give you some visual feedback as to what's going on in the chain, but it logs everything. So I can actually see what was done during that Rsync process. So it'll show me, okay, these are the commands it ran, and it goes through. This is the files it deleted. These are the files it copied, and this is important because if something fails, you can actually go and look through the logs and see at what point it's failing, so that you can debug it. So that's pretty cool as well. Again, I know that was fast, but you can actually open these up and watch them going live if you've got a much longer commit going. So that's pretty cool, and that's pretty handy to use. Make sense so far? Any questions so far?
I think so far we're clear of questions.
Cool, great. So let's add some more actions. One of the things that we do is we make pretty heavy use of Composer for all of our plugins or themes. Anything that is either a plugin that is committed to the WordPress directory, the WordPress repository, or even a premium plugin, we actually commit that through Composer. So rather than having our plugins sitting in the repo, we're really just making a line in Composer. We're writing a little line in Composer that compiles and grabs the files it needs at the time of deployment, right? And so what Buddy can do is so let's go ahead and I don't know if it's hard to see or not, but there's the little plus buttons above and below the action. So I'm going to add an action before the Rsync process, and I'm going to have Composer run on my system.
Hey Steve, I think your screen froze.
Did I lock?
I think so.
Okay. We share. If it doesn't work, I will rejoin here. Yeah. Oh.
You may have reached your limit.
Yeah. Zoom.
Oh, Zoom.
Yeah. Anything?
Not yet.
All right. I'm going to log out, log back in. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Will do. So this is something that we ran into last at the general meetup, where he was kind of showcasing a screen, going through documentation, and just locked up. And so we had to switch, like I had to start screen recording, and then after a while mine locked up. We had to go back and forth. Like it's apparently an
Is it the current load of Zoom is just having issues?
It's actually the current Mac OS is with Zoom specifically.
Big Sur.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Damn you, Big Sur.
Are you on Big Sur, B?
I
Yes.
am. All right, let's see how long we can get on this screen share. I may have to do it again because we still got a lot to cover.
Yeah.
All right. So can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so what I did now is I added an action before the Rsync process, right? And the action I want to add here is a PHP action. right? And so here's some, before I add this action, something to understand here is Buddy also has its own Docker system internally, right? And so if you need to run, say, PHP commands, you add this action. What Buddy's going to do when it executes this action is it's actually going to fire up a Docker instance, run your PHP internally for you, and basically do whatever process you're asking it to do. And so I've fired up a PHP instance. I can choose the PHP version I want. And so I know I want 7.4.16. Let's go back to run. And then all I want to do on this on this particular action is run Composer, right? And so Composer is already set up to run in our repo. All we're doing here is executing a Composer install, right? And so this particular action is running Composer. And what Composer is going to do is compile the files that we want and basically ready them in the Buddy file system so that they're then synced out to the server. And so that's what this is doing. So the way to think about Buddy is because it's got its own sort of internal instances, its own internal Docker system, you're executing code kind of within Buddy, within that file system that I showed earlier, so that it can then copy the files to where it needs to copy them. Right, so that's what this does. And so that's all I'm going to do here in this action is just basically tell it that I want Composer to basically I'm firing up a PHP instance and I'm running Composer install. Add this action.
And just before you move on, Tom was asking if you have time, maybe later on, to come back to this more specifically about how you manage plugins and things like that with Composer.
Happy to.
Yeah.
Yep. And so the only other thing I did here is I went to the action tab and I gave this action a name so that I can refer back to it later. Buddy assigns it's a name. It assigns each action a name by default, but they're kind of technical and a little confusing. So I gave it a name, Composer install. I'm saving the action. Now I've got that in my chain there. Okay. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to run an npm command. So the other thing that we do is all of our, most of our themes use Tailwind, right? And to compile Tailwind, we're running a node command or an npm command, basically to compile the theme or to compile the CSS and the JavaScript, right? And so that's the last command I want to run here. And again, here, I'm just going to, right in between these two, I'm going to hit the plus button. I'm going to add a node action. Right, so we're adding Node.js, and basically what I'm going to do here is I want to run npm install, and then our command. I don't need yarn. Our command is npm run prod. That's just the internal command we use to basically run the production version of the CSS and the JavaScript. Again, because this is its own little Docker instance, I know that locally I'm running node 14. Let me look it up, 14.15.4. So I'm going to match that in Buddy. That's important, right? Because your node instance can actually break. So if you're using an older version of Node here than you are locally, or vice versa, it might not be compatible, and so that might break. So it is important to kind of line these up. And if you do upgrade your Node instance locally, then you can go into Buddy and just edit this action, upgrade Node here. So these instances do need to match kind of what you're doing locally. I think that's it for this one. Let's call this. Oh, that's fine. npm. Let's call it npm run prod, and that's ready to go. And so now I've got a PHP instance, a Node instance, and then my Rsync. Okay, this is when I run this pipeline, it's going to take a little bit longer now because Node takes a little bit longer to compile, but it's still pretty fast. So let's go ahead and watch this.
So while this is running, Steve, that first step is preparing the environment. Is that basically the Docker instance that it's setting up, or each one of those steps a separate Docker instance?
I believe it's one. Oop, I've got an error. So I believe it's just the one instance. I'll tell you, I know what the error is, but I'll show you in a minute. I believe it's just the one instance. Buddy adds that automatically. So because I added a PHP instance, it's creating that Docker instance for me. But I think it's using the same instance for both the PHP instance and the Node instance. I think it's smart enough. The reason I got an error is because I forgot to change the this. So there is, let's go back to my actions, and this is kind of cool. So I'm actually glad this step failed, because I can see this pipeline is now in a failed state, right? And it's telling me exactly where it failed. So it failed on this action. If I open up my run prod, I can there it is. So basically what I didn't do is I was running this in the root of my of my repo. I instead want to run this within the theme. Right. So my theme that I'm running here is Wingspan. And so that's what I'm doing here is under the cache tab. I'm just telling it, you know what, you need to go to this path first before you run Node. I
think your screen failed again.
Damn it. Man, this sucks. All right. I will be right back. It's good. Okay. Talk amongst yourselves again. Good stopping point.
While we're waiting for Steve to come back, I saw a couple questions come in about the plugin management thing. If you have other questions kind of as we're going along, feel free to use the chat. I know there's some new folks in the who joined since we started, but feel free to use the chat in order to bubble up your questions, and we'll get those over to Steve as soon as he's back and ready to share the screen. Hey,
I'm here. Yeah, I kept a bookmark this time. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen again. I guarantee it. And so where I left off was I was just saying that underneath the cache tab, there is this thing called mount file system path. And I'm basically just telling it, change over to this path before you run Node, right? So the reason it failed is because it didn't find a Node instance, or excuse me, package.json within that folder, right? So now that I've fixed it, I'll run the pipeline again, and it should work. So what's cool about Buddy is it's pretty easy to debug, and it's really easy to kind of see what's going on at what point, and you can spot where the bug is pretty fast. It gives you a lot of nice feedback. So like I said, the npm process takes a bit. The rsync process will be fast.
Does every time this boots up, or like you run the process, does it cache the Docker instance, or does it have to rebuild it every time?
It is cached. Okay. So it's there waiting for me now that we've run it once. I don't know how long that Docker instance sticks around, but if you're running throughout the day, you'll see that it sticks around.
Got it.
And the nice thing is now that I've run it a couple times, it keeps a log. So we've executed this 3 times. We had 2 successes, 1 failure, right? And it shows how long they take. So that last rollout that last deploy took 33 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
That's about it as far as how to set up Buddy and how to work with it. But I do want to look at some of these actions, right? And so I'm not going to add any of these, but some of the other things that we do here, remember I mentioned Ghost Inspector, right? So there's the Ghost Inspector action. And it's a seamless integration with Ghost Inspector. So if you have a Ghost Inspector account, you just set up the integration and then you're ready to go with Ghost Inspector. And so basically what you do is once you get that connected is you tell it basically during this action, I want to kick off these tests, right? And then once you kicked off those tests, you can tell it either Ghost Inspector does this or Buddy does this, but you can tell it, I want to report that out to Slack, right? And so that's what we do. We have a channel that is just for all of our Ghost Inspector tests. And so when Buddy runs its thing, it then sends a little quick report into Slack so we can see if we've got all green lights on Ghost Inspector. And we can know right away we've got something that may be broken that we have to go look at. But you can also say in Slack, when this deployment runs, I want to get a report. I want to know when it starts. I want to know when it ends. I want to know where it deployed. And so you have full control with Slack here. If you're into SMS, you can say, send me an SMS message, right? And so I'm only scratching the surface here as to what actions are available. But you can see here, I mean, there are integrations with almost anything you could want to do inside of Buddy. So it's a really handy system and a great way to not only kind of give feedback to your team as you're deploying stuff, but you can also integrate this. You could alert your clients, right? So a lot of things we have, especially with production, we'll let our clients know when something deployed or deployed successfully, or if they want it, if they want that kind of messaging. So that's Buddy. One of the cool things I saw here that I noticed today is you can actually run a Lighthouse report, right? So once you roll out, it'll then fire off a Lighthouse report to tell you how you're doing on a page speed score, which that's near and dear to my heart.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. That's Buddy.
Okay. So one of the questions that had come up around obviously the composer piece and plugin management is, I think just specifically about how you manage that with Composer. Obviously, Composer is a system where you can kind of handle dependency management like npm, things like that. But for systems that aren't on like WordPress.org, premium plugins like a Gravity Forms or something like that, that doesn't, it's not immediately accessible in the same way. How are you kind of managing those premium plugins?
Are you recording this?
No.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll actually answer the question. So
Yeah.
I'm going to stop my video again and hope this works. So if you're not familiar with Composer, highly recommend Composer. It's great for just for managing code and keeping your repos really, really small. So Composer is at getcomposer.org. Again, that's probably a whole other meeting by itself to talk about Composer. And Aaron Holbrook is a specialist at it. I will post a video from that a talk he gave at OC WordCamp a couple years back that goes over both Buddy and Composer, but that's Composer. What we use is a system called Private Packagist.
Okay.
And so Private Packagist allows us to host our own packages, right? It's packagist.com, right? Let me backtrack a minute here. So if you're not already familiar, all of the plugins that are on WordPress are available at wp-packagist.org, right? And so we use that pretty extensively for the stuff that's available for free, right? This does not include premium plugins, right? So anything that you can find at wordpress.org, this is actually what drives that, right? And so we use this pretty extensively for a plugin like Ninja Forms, right? Ninja Forms is available for free. You can use this, and here's how you basically find it. So you type in Ninja Forms, and there is the basically the Composer call for Ninja Forms. So that's WP Packagist. For premium plugins, we keep all of our own premium plugins that we've paid for stored at our private packages. So we're using that internally just to be able to manage our own Composer packages within our own projects.
Okay. And then do you have a process like to regularly go in and update that or something like that to keep it up to date?
We regularly, as we're managing our sites and we're working on our sites, we look and see if plugins are out of date, right? And we use Packagist, our own Packagist, we basically keep that up to date with whatever plugins we own. But what's great about Composer is you tell it what version you want, right? And you can lock the version if you haven't tested. So let's say WooCommerce just came out with version 5, for instance, right? And so version 5 had a pretty significant upgrade with jQuery Migrate, right? And so not all sites that we worked on were ready for that version. So within Composer, we were able to say, lock this at the most recent version of version 4, right? But don't go to version 5. And that's another advantage of using Composer is you can say, only go up to this version and stop there until we're ready. And then even when you go to version 5, you can say, don't give me the most recent version of version 5, give me this particular version. And you can manage all that through Composer.
Can I throw something in here?
Yeah,
sure.
The WP packages for me was just too pricey. It's like $700 a year for only a couple of developers to use.
Packagist or WP Packagist?
For private
Packagist, yes.
It's pricey. And
it is pricey.
Yeah. So what we started doing, I feel like, is this recording still going on? Okay, the recording is still going on.
It's all right. Brandon's going to edit all this out later.
Yeah.
I think actually private packages is quite respectable in this. But what we ended up doing is we ended up creating a completely separate repository just for premium plugins, and then just kept on uploading them and pinning them to the version numbers. But it gets excessive in size. That's the
we
big
pay,
downside.
yeah. So we're paying 133 euros per month for packages.com.
So that's almost 200, right? That's almost
It's not cheap. And so, but we were using to David. It's a great comment because we were using SatisPress. So there actually is a WordPress plugin that allows you to create a package manager. It's just not very good, and it's not very.
And you have to maintain it yourself. That's the other.
Yes, yeah. It's extremely hard to use. So for our $200 or whatever dollars we're paying a month, it's just a time saver. But you're right, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
And the other thing for people that are considering using Composer, the other thing that is the JBlock, BLOCH WordPress release. The WordPress releases track a few days later than the actual release of it. So just be aware of that and sometimes it could be a week later, it could be 10 days later. So I have found that the Roots, are you familiar with the Roots Composer? So Roots actually packages up the current versions much quicker. Usually within 1 or 2 days maximum.
If we have something that needs a hot fix, right, and we need it faster than WPackagist has updated it, we'll actually then take it out of Composer, commit it to the code, and have it as part of our repo temporarily, and then later on bring it back into Composer. So we do juggle that because you're right, that does happen. WPackagist can have a delay.
Yeah, I cannot begin to rave enough about Composer, and especially the version locking. When you have a site that's solid, that's working, you can stop people from updating those plugins and feel like it's solid, right?
And so what you want to do is, if you're hosting at Nexus or WP Engine, right, they'll actually there's 2 checkboxes in all of your instances. They'll say update the core code and update the plugins, turn off the plugin updater, right? Because it'll overwrite your, what you're trying to manage in Composer.
Yeah, you can also turn that off in WP config. That's what we usually end up doing, so we don't worry about where it's deploying to. But it's But anyways, thanks for letting me.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Good stuff. That's really amazing, by the way. The Buddy.works. Thanks.
Yeah.
Buddy.works, by the way, is not free. Since we are talking about pricing,
About expensive things.
Yeah. Let me see what Buddy.works costs. I don't remember what we pay.
And I think it's based on project, like number of projects too, right?
Could be.
Yeah.
It is. Well, actually, they do have a free version, which is 5 projects. So you can try it for free up to 5 projects. The pro version is $75, which is 20 projects, and then the hyper version is $200 a month, which is unlimited projects. I believe that's what we have.
It seems kind of like an if this then that kind of a thing, or Zapier or Zapier
Zapier
or whatever that is. But it seems
there's
like you
zaps.
can kind of change.
You're creating zaps.
I hear you.
So it must be Zapier.
Okay. Yeah.
This is like a continuous point of contention.
You might as well call it a GIF at this point.
Oh, don't. Even.
Ooh, I know, that's fighting words.
Yeah. But it feels like it has a lot of those integrations. Like I'm part of their newsletter, so I see like every week or something they've got like a handful of new integrations that they're putting in. But it does seem like again, if you've got something that has a service out there, you can access it through some of these, like, this will happen, then this will happen. Okay, then let's chain this other thing to this other system. And I think like that's the thing that I'm and why I asked about that file system or the Docker instance, whether it goes, it's the same one sort of throughout. I think that one of the things we're looking at is how to handle automated updates through it. And so like one of the triggers that you showed in the beginning was do it on a recurring basis rather than on a commit to your code.
Mm-hmm.
So something could run every week, every day, like whatever, to kind of manage that, push things through to a staging server, and could be tested for using Ghost Inspector or something like that for visual regression, things like that. That's sort of how we're visualizing our usage of it at this point. But I think like the thing that I don't really I haven't used it enough to kind of understand yet is that file system that it does cache on that server is ultimately like whatever the resulting like build of that file system, that's what gets pushed over.
Yeah, and I didn't really spend any time there, but let me show it again.
Okay.
And so basically, and again, I'm not really going to do anything to this. It's just a visual representation, but this is what is stored in Buddy, right?
Mhm.
So they're basically mimicking what is in my repo plus after I've run Composer.
Got it.
So it's a way for me to just see what's going to be eventually rolled out to the server.
Okay.
We were using a different system called Deploybot before we moved over to Buddy, and it didn't have this. And this is actually one of the reasons we moved over to Buddy, because it was just more visual.
Yeah, that's I like the chaining and the fact that you can just go, oh, we have a new step that we need to slot in the middle of that whole chain.
Yep.
That's pretty awesome.
There's one other thing I didn't show, and that is variables, right? And so you can actually have variables set per pipeline, right? And we do make pretty extensive use of environment variables on our within our systems, right? For instance, here's our we've got our Ghost Inspector API key here, right? Or and I probably shouldn't have this on video, but we may have like a variable that says Google tag manager key, right? Or Google Analytics tag ID, something along those lines. And we put it here, and as part of our actions, we can say, I forget what that one's called. What that action's called. Give me a second here. I'm gonna cheat. The action is it's a PHP action. I'll actually let me just show it on a different pipeline. And so we actually have a PHP action that is basically create a .env PHP file, right? And so before it rolls out the code, it creates the proper environment variable file, pulling in the environment variables that are associated with that project, right? And so you can basically you can put in a Google Tag Manager ID that only exists within Buddy, and you can put in your code, if this environment variable exists, then show the tag. If it doesn't, then don't. And so that way we're not recording any of the Google traffic locally, right? Or you can put the tag in on production only and not on staging and dev. And again, you're never showing the tag because you've got that conditional in there, right? And so that's how we're making use of these environment variables.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah. So each pipeline has its own set of variables.
Okay. So you basically use a project for like per client essentially, right? So you have,
correct.
Like you said, the production, staging, and dev or similar kind of a setup.
It really is per website, right? So we may have clients that have multiple websites or multiple projects, but it really is per site. Or again, it depends, right? Because I showed you that site that has multiple websites within one project. It depends.
Okay, but it is one repository per project. Like that's a hard rule, right?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're basically telling it at the project level, associate this project with this repo, right? Now you can have a branching strategy, but associate this project with this repo. One thing I want to say on you made a comment about recurring deployments, right? We actually don't use that. And you want to be careful with that, because if it's recurring and you've committed something, but you forgot about it or didn't want to deploy it, and it hits that recurring deploy, it's going to go.
Yeah.
So you just want to be careful with that.
Sure. Yeah. Interesting.
My team keeps their branches very clean. I do not. So I'm the one that's going to make that mistake. So you can't turn on recurring at Zeek because of me.
Because of you.
Yeah, because
I like
Steve.
it. That's
Yeah.
the Steve clause. That's what we call it.
Mhm.
Cool. All right. As we kind of keep asking questions, if you have any other questions, Harold was asking if Buddy.works is basically a CI/CD platform. I think it seems like it can be used like that for sure. But if you have other questions, drop them in the chat. We'll keep asking questions, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask at this point where I think Steve's done with his presentation for the most part, right?
I think so. I can't say enough good things about it. We rely on it. It's just part of our standard deployments now. Oh, one more thing I forgot a key part, right? If you make a mistake, it has the rollback, right? So this is where we roll back the code.
This is the Steve clause.
This is this is why we use Buddy, right? So let me go back to my pipeline here. So let's say I executed this one and it was a mistake. What I can do is basically say, you know what, let's go back to execution 1. And where is that? Where's the rollback? Now I've lost it. Is it here or?
This is where you pick up the phone and
Yeah.
hey, Aaron.
Yeah.
Hey, Aaron.
No joke. I forget. Yeah, it actually is, and I'm failing it. I'm hyping this point and I'm failing at it because
is it in that drop? The drop down that was on the previous one, is that and under the awaiting push?
No, no, it's because I have these two set up. One's on push and one's manual.
Oh, okay.
God, where's that rollback? The rollback is the coolest part. I'll find it. Keep talking. I'll find it here. Give me a second.
What while you're looking for that, you mentioned using Ghost Inspector, but are there other things that you have, you guys have incorporated with this process?
Like I said, we make pretty extensive use of Slack, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're depending on the pipeline, we're sending a lot of Slack notifications, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on what kind of notifications we want. We have a lot of shared Slack channels with our clients, so that way they get notifications as to what's going on. So the Slack is key. There is built into every pipeline, they give you a PHP syntax checker, right? That's a standard thing with Buddy, and so that's kind of cool. We don't use it a lot, but it does work. There's there's a security checker as well, which will do another scan of the code just to make sure that you don't have any security holes, some sort of the basic PHP security holes. And then, like I said, the environment variables, we make pretty good use of that.
Okay.
Yeah, I cannot find the rollback. I know it's there, and it's probably right in front of me. I just I can't find it. But that I call it the Command Z, right? It's the Command Z of rolling out code. So if you do have Ghost Inspector set up and you've made a mistake or there's a bug or something's going wrong, you can basically just say go back to the last commit or the last execution, and it'll roll it back for you.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn this into all my questions getting answered Meetup. I guess the way I'm thinking about it is let's say you have that PHP syntax checker or something like that running. Is that like a point where like that thing fails and it would notify you and you would go in and like manually go ahead, or like would it fix things and commit them back for you or anything like that? Like
it's pretty basic. So
okay.
The one that they offer, it's basically just going to fail.
Okay.
And then you'll get a notification that the Buddy process failed, right? Okay. And so inside of Buddy, you can basically say what you want to happen at the end of a success or fail, whether you want it to email you or go out to Slack or whatever you want it to do, right? And so you're going to know through your notification that you got a failure, and then you go in and you'll see within the actions where it failed, right? So if it's failing it, the PHP syntax checker usually goes right at the beginning of the chain, right? So if it fails just that basic PHP syntax checking, you don't want it to execute any further.
Right.
Or you don't want to roll out that code. So you actually want it to fail at that point so you can go back in and debug. And the syntax checker will tell you exactly what was failing so you can go in and fix your code.
Got it. Okay. All right. I'm sure I could keep asking you questions about it all night, but
it's fine.
I think I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat for you.
Sure.
But they have a free version so people can kind of get started with it, kind of goof around with it, which is good. Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Like I said, we swear by it.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time on a Monday evening that's not your Monday evening to come
good.
grace us with your presence. But
all good. I looked on my calendar and I had nothing on the calendar for the entire year. So
we caught you on one of your open nights is what you're saying. Awesome. Well, yeah.
Anyway, thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it there.